Hello, guys. Today I'm going to tell you a little story. In the past, many cultures had a ritual that they performed to introduce young boys into adulthood, and these rituals were similar across cultures, and it went something like this. So, when the young boys in the community would get to like 16, 17, or 18 years old, the older men would dress up like demons or like wild animals. So just kind of a disguise and something scary. And they would snatch the boys out of their beds at night. Then these boys were taken deep into the forest where they were either tied to a tree or partially buried, okay, like just halfway. Then they were also given instructions not to return home until after a given period of time. Now, for some cultures, they could have like 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months. But some cultures were really, really brutal and they went up to like 6 months that these young boys are supposed to be in this deep forest. And it's not just any kind of forest, it's the kind of forest that maybe it's termed the evil forest. You know, those places that are really scary that these boys will have to face wild animals, they'll have to face so many things. Okay, maybe even spiritual stuff. Usually, in one session of this ritual, a group of boys could be taken from the community, but they were not all dropped at the same place. So each person will have to be by themselves. If they found each other during their time in the forest, cool. But most often, they will be dropped off as individuals. Some people might not succeed finding other people throughout their times. When this time is over and they succeed to get home, those who survive it and can also find their way back home, they'll be welcomed back into the community as men. And again, at this point, they are not allowed to go back to their parents' homes, but to start families of their own because they are considered as men who can take care of themselves and take care of others and take care of a whole family. So at this point, they go to start their own family immediately. It's a big celebration when they come back home. Imagine the situation, think about it, 16-year-old, 17, 18-year-old boys in the forest by yourself. It's brutal, really brutal. But guess what? About 90% of these children always made it back home. About 90%. And it is told that the ones that don't survive, they don't usually die like maybe after being in the forest for some months. They usually give up early enough, or they usually don't try at all. Like they get depressed, they sit with themselves, they cry. Why would their parents put them through this? And they don't try. So most of them give up. Not particularly eaten by animals. There were some that would be eaten by animals, of course, but most of them that didn't try to get food or got sick out of the stress and finally just died. Okay, but majority of those who tried, who after crying, of course, because it must be painful, after crying and going through the stress of why this should happen to you, then they realize that they have to do something. They have to get shelter. They're in the forest, they could be all wild animals. They have to build something for themselves with their own hands. They have to find their own food. They have to sit alone with their thoughts. I think this should have been the most difficult one. Sitting alone with your thoughts in this deep forest. But that was a time that they will have to think about the lives they want to have, to think about the families they are going to build, to even reflect on the kind of man they will become. That was it. So, no matter how brutal these days were, most of those people, most of our ancestors believed that this was the only way to actually make a man become a man or make a boy become a man. This is the only way to introduce them into adulthood so that they will have to understand that adulthood requires sacrifice, it requires hard work, it requires maybe some time alone for you to really sit and reflect. It requires giving up your sleep. That's why they were taken off their beds at midnight, very scary times. And they had to come to that consciousness that in this life of adulthood, there's going to be a lot to fight out there. Thank God that today no one would subject you to that kind of a process. But what does it really take to become an adult? How is our generation, or how are people introduced to adulthood in our time? Um, Unfortunately, most people leave this to chance. Most parents assume that their children are just going to grow up as they grow old, which is not true. There are many people who are growing older these days but not growing up. Many people are stuck with that man-child kind of syndrome. The man-child theory was based on the fact that most children get more attached to their moms because their mothers provide food for them, provides protection for them, provides that care for them that always makes them feel safe by their mother's side. And in those days, even most children, even though they were grown up, if they had nightmares, they'll feel better if they were sleeping in bed with their parents. Okay. And so, like in the past, taking those boys out of their beds was kind of snatching them away from their mothers. That was it, trying to disconnect that dependency on the mother. It's not as if their fathers were not being caretakers or providers, but their moms mostly provide them the comfort, that place where you feel safe. And so whenever a child goes out and maybe causes some kind of trouble or gets into trouble and someone is trying to beat them up, they could always run and hide behind their moms. And that keeps happening even as we grow up. It's very likely that even when you're older, whenever you have any situation, it's very easy to run back to your mom where you can have that conversation with her. And if it depended on moms only to push their boys or their daughters out there to face what life really is, most mothers will even want to take it for their children. They will not want their children to go through that stress. If it meant that they put themselves out there to get hit, to get beaten down, just so that their child is safe, the moms to do that. So it was left on the father to take the hard decisions, to take the tough decisions of snatching these boys and taking them through the forest. So today still, the father's role is very important. The problem that most people are facing today, a lot of fathers are not available. They are not available to give that guidance. Okay, so things are not the way they were in the past, that there's going to be one particular ritual you're going to do to just carry the child and force the child into adulthood. You will need to carefully guide the child. You have to make it intentional. But most of us leave it to chance. We think that our children are just going to grow up as they grow old. It won't happen that way. You have to be intentional about grooming them towards adulthood, grooming them towards responsibility. If when the father figure is not available, it could really be a big challenge, because you're leaving that responsibility to a mother who mostly has a soft heart towards a child. It's not going to be easy. And now most women are forced to take up the role of both a father and a mother. They have to be caring, they have to provide a safe space. At the same time, they have to take the hard decisions. Peter Pan is the perfect example for a man-child, someone who doesn't want to grow up. Of course, the age will come in, but then he doesn't want to grow up. And in his case, it's most likely because the father figure in his life is not someone that he wants to grow to be like. It's Captain Hook. The guy is basically a tyrant. And Peter Pan doesn't look up to that man and admire him, or see that this is a life that he wants, or a person that he wants to become like. So he prefers to stay like a boy. Why? Because there's no father figure in his life that makes sense to him.